We are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and for 8 years now, a group of experts, activists, writers, and commentators, and a large portion of the American public have felt that the Justice Department should have done much more to prosecute bankers for criminal fraud and other criminal activities leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, and sadly continuing afterwards, long afterwards. Now the Justice Department has said it's going to change its approach to those types of crimes. Joining us now to discuss this is William K. Black. Bill Black is Associate Professor of Law and Economics at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. He is also one of the guys who helped get at least 1,000 bankers or so during the much smaller savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, much smaller crisis. Of course, many, many, many more indictments. William K. Black joins us now. Bill, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So listen, I'm so glad you wrote about this topic because, I guess it was on September 9th, I saw in the New York Times, Justice Department sets sights on Wall Street executives, the idea being that they would prioritize the prosecution of individual employees and not just the companies, and put pressure on corporations to turn over evidence against their executives. Now, there's an idea. And I guess my reaction to this is it true that it's better late than never in a situation like this, or is this just symbolic? It's too late. Why are they even bringing this up?
Well, both things are true, of course. It's better if they were to change their policy to adopt a good policy, but this is the latest in the series of smoke screens that so far haven't led to any change. And, of course, we know that because as we're talking, they just dealt with a massive fraud that may have killed 100 people. This is General Motors. And they refuse to indict any individual.
Now, why would that be? Now, first of all, what was the nature of that particular fraud?
So that fraud was to hide a known safety defect with the ignition system in General Motors cars. And this one is really scary because the ignition system was designed in such a defective fashion that you could lose, basically the car would turn off, all right? And so when all the electronics would turn off while you were driving 70 miles an hour down the road. And that meant you, of course, lost control over the car, and the power-assisted brakes no longer worked, et cetera. Assisted turning didn't work.
Right.
And so it was a really scary defect. They knew about it early, and they covered it up, and this cover-up went all the way to the level, at least, of their general counsel. And indeed, their legal staff in general, I must say, as a lawyer, behaved in a way that was reprehensible. So GM lied for years and years about the scope of this problem, finally admitted roughly 8 months ago that they'd lied, appointed someone to look at it internally about 14 months ago. And they reported that, in fact, there were much greater problems. They finally put some new people in, and now the estimate is instead of 5 people potentially having lost their lives as a result of this, the correct figure may be more like 100. But, of course, when that car, the driver loses control, it isn't simply a danger to that driver and everyone in the car. It's to all of us on the roads because it basically becomes an unguided missile.
Right. Now, when they covered up this deadly defect, which had already taken lives, was that criminal fraud as well as civil fraud? Were they committing a crime?
Yes, and indeed, the Justice Department, if you read what it says, they clearly say that the elements of the crime were there. Now, we're doing this on the basis of the leaked description from Justice and GM of the settlement. Right, so some caution has to be taken, but this is, literally just hit the wires yesterday. So it's very new news. It was, of course, therefore, the great opportunity for Attorney General Lynch to show that she was going to actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk, with the memorandum that you were focusing on in this show. And they have failed as badly as it is possible to fail.
Now, why is it? This gets way beyond. I guess this gets into the area of speculation, but it does astound me as a citizen that this kind of thing isn't a national scandal. We're talking about the deaths of innocent people. We have a Fifth Estate, a journalistic class that is supposed to pursue this and publicize this stuff. We have a Justice Department. There was a day when I might have thought the public would be outraged at the idea that executives in a major corporation were covering up deaths, allowing those deaths to continue for what probably is no reason other than profits, and yet I don't hear a lot of outrage about this. Does that surprise you?
Not anymore, but you're quite right that unless and until the public becomes enraged enough to demand change, not demand injustice, but to demand justice, it's not going to happen. And notice, this news broke early enough that the Republican debaters had it available. So if you want to bash a Democratic administration, hey, this is great stuff, because the regulators also didn't regulate pretty much at all in this setting. The National Transportation Safety Board in particular. And you notice you don't hear a single Republican candidate attacking the Democrats for failing to prosecute the elite bankers.
And you and I know, William K. Black, that with today's Republican Party, it will be a cold day in hell before you hear a Republican criticize a regulator for not regulating, or an administration for discouraging a regulator from regulating.
Yes, but this is prosecution, right? A prosecution where the bank, the broader topic, the bank admits its employees acted criminally. And the Justice Department refuses to prosecute, and even the individuals, and even in the rare case that they prosecute the corporation, they then cut a special deal in advance that a guilty plea will not have the normal effect of a guilty plea. This is prosecution light.
I get so angry at these deals. I have to say, I'm not, I've covered them myself for 8 years now. I never cease to get furious at some point during the conversation because it just seems so outrageous to me. But William K. Black, I guess I would say, I'm trying to remember now. I don't have it in front of me. I believe it was GE Capital. I am not 100% sure. In one of the cases where there was a financial settlement against between the Justice Department and a banking institution, the Justice Department documents even identified individuals within the institution's accounting department. It said it could be tracked to individuals who had fraudulently misrepresented. And I don't know if that rings a bell with you, but in one of the cases, I'll find it after the show, that was brought. Even then, there was no prosecution.
They know the individuals. I mean, and indeed, the memorandum we're talking about, what people listening to this program need to understand is that this is actually the old policy. Indeed, it has formally been the policy of the Justice Department for at least 35 years. So the anomaly, and it didn't start 7 years ago, it started 15 years ago, roughly, actually 17 years ago, apparently with the Holder Memorandum. Now, that was in the prior administration, the Clinton administration, and Holder was an attorney general, but he was a senior official equivalent to Yates, who is the senior Justice Department official it's being called the Yates Memorandum, the thing that you're talking about in the show. Well, in essence, the Yates memorandum says, no, you're supposed to act like real prosecutors. And so a real prosecutor always, and I emphasize the word always, in dealing with a corporation where the corporation wanted to plead or where the corporation was doing a deferred prosecution agreement or a non-prosecution agreement, you would always require the bank or the other corporation, whatever it was, the defendant, to identify the individuals who committed the crime. And then you would virtually always prosecute them. And in the rare case you didn't prosecute them, it'd be that they were 75 years old and they had liver cancer. That type of thing.
Right. Now, and of course, the point being, as you've said so many times, that deterrence, that fundamental principle of criminal justice, does not take place if people are well paid for doing their jobs, and as part of their jobs they commit fraud and they're not punished for it. Then there is a positive incentive and no deterrent applied. So, William K. Black, law professor, economics professor, question for you, and I'm genuinely curious about this. I don't know the answer. If something like Enron were to come to light today, would there be prosecutions, you think?
Well, see, Enron is an excellent test, and it shows how far back this pathology goes when it comes to banks. Because what people forget is the huge fraud scam that Enron did, in addition to the California energy crisis. But the really big dollar one was all these transactions involving these off-book corporations that were so supposedly independent, but in fact they were a scam. And those scams were overwhelmingly done with the very large banks. Mm-hmm. I mean, the largest banks in the world. And the internal memos, which, by the way, were not discovered by the Justice Department, but by the bankruptcy trustee, who actually looked at the banks and did discovery. And the email, from a prosecutor's standpoint, it's just a dream case because this was early and the bankers were still stupid about their emails. And so they just laid out that they knew that Fastow, who was the Enron CFO, was running a complete scam, and they knew that the scam could only work if the banks helped the scam through fraudulent actions, and they eagerly, in every case, said, yes, absolutely we'll do this. And the banks were not prosecuted.
So even then, this softer, this hands-off policy seemed to be in effect.
Yes, and if you want the foreshadowing of the crisis in the regulatory ranks, your listeners can read the Spillenkoffen testimony. Richard Spillenkoffen was the longtime head of supervision at the Federal Reserve. He testified in front of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, and he provided them with a memorandum about these things. And probably the most chilling portion is, as you know, the Fed could care less about supervision. It is literally a tertiary concern. So Spillenkoffen used his very limited political capital to get a briefing of the senior leadership of the Fed, because he viewed what the banks had done at Enron as being so disastrous and so, it's a critical juncture that it be deterred by strong action. So he briefed the board, and he reports that as a result of the briefing, the board, this again, the Federal Reserve Board, and its entire senior leadership, they were outraged. They were outraged at Spillenkoffen.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. One does not do that. William K. Black, I have one other question for you, which is, and this always comes up, and like clockwork, this appeared in the New York Times Deal Book section. As soon as the Justice Department made this empty promise to prosecute bankers, this headline: Justice Department vow to go after bankers may prove a promise hard to keep. We always hear in certain elements of the financial press that you really can't, you couldn't get these guys. By the way, this article uses a line I wrote myself 5 years ago. It starts out, banks don't break the law, bankers do, which is true. But then they go on to say you couldn't prosecute, they probably wouldn't have been able to prosecute Angelo Mozillo, who founder of Countrywide. You really can't get these guys. They're just too hard to prosecute. You always hear that. Is that true?
No, and it shows you that we continue to take our advice from the people who have failed us utterly and refuse to listen to the people who have succeeded. We know how to succeed, as you say, in much more difficult circumstances with frauds that were far harder to prove in many cases. Here, I mean, liars' loans, seriously, it's
right.
not subtle.
Right.
They realized in this crisis that they could get away with anything. So over time, they became much more blatant about it. And unlike the savings and loan debacle that you talked about, where we had very few whistleblowers and sort of not high quality, in other words, people who were senior and clearly were not disaffected employees. Here we have people like Richard Bowen
at
Citigroup,
right,
who tried to do the right thing, warned repeatedly, knew he was going to be retaliated against, eventually CC'd Robert Rubin on the memos. And so he was an executive or senior vice president, and he had a staff of 225 underwriters reporting to them. So he's, the quintessential guy that does good banking. He looks at the mortgages that Citigroup is buying, by the way, doing no internal due diligence first, which is in itself insane, right?
Well, it's not insane if there's no disincentive to just keep churning these things and make money, is it?
No, that's not true, because you can only, as I'll tell you in the story, you can only sell these things through reps and representations and warranties.
Right, but if you don't care if those are true.
Well, but you certainly ought to, because, it comes back to the difference between the individual and the corporation. The corporation most assuredly would want to believe they're true, because otherwise their liability is measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which is what would have happened with vigorous prosecution of Citigroup. But Bowen's folks originally find that these loans that Citigroup is buying, 40% of the reps and warranties of the people selling, in other words, the loan originator, the lender, then sells it to Citigroup, and that loan originator, lender, and then seller lies to Citigroup, says, hey, these aren't liars' loans, these don't have inflated appraisals. And Bowen's group looks, and 40% of the time, those reps and warranties are false when they first go. Well, here's a big problem. Citigroup turns around and sells these mortgages, which become $50 billion a year, to Fannie and Freddie, with the same reps and warranties which they know to be false. Now, that is a platinum platter fraud case.
And nobody went to jail. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it there, Bill, but I guess I would say...
No one's even prosecuted, much less sent to jail, and the percentage goes from 40 to 80% fraud over time.
Well, that suggests we need some fundamental change here, and we're not going to get it with just a memo from the Justice Department unless it's followed up by concrete action. They should hire you. I know you offered to step in. They should take you up on your offer. And as always, William K. Black, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. Take care.
You bet. We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.